She thought it was just another lazy pig wandering off to find better scraps. She thought it was just their prize pig, Bessie, wandering off again, a costly mistake but a simple one. But what Clementine discovered by following that pig into the Forbidden Hills was a secret that held the power to either save her family from the bank's foreclosure or destroy them completely. The truth wasn't a person, but something hidden within their worthless piece of land, and it was about to change everything. The sun had barely crested the hills when Clementine noticed their prize pig, Bessie, had broken through the fence again. Her father, Amos, would be furious if he found out. They couldn't afford to lose any livestock, not with the bank threatening to take their land next month. Clementine grabbed her worn boots and slipped out of the farmhouse before anyone else woke up. Bessie's tracks led away from their usual grazing area, deeper into the rocky terrain behind their property. Clementine had never ventured this far into the hills before. Her father always warned her to stay close to the house, claiming the land beyond their fence line was too dangerous for a young woman alone. But desperation made her bold. Without Bessie, they'd have nothing left to sell. The pig's trail wound through thick brush and between massive boulders that seemed to form natural walls. Clementine pushed through thorny branches that caught her simple dress and scratched her arms. She could hear Bessie grunting somewhere ahead, but the sound echoed strangely among the rocks, making it hard to pinpoint the exact location. Then she heard something else, a low groan that definitely wasn't coming from a pig. Clementine froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She thought about turning back, about forgetting Bessie and running home to safety. But her family needed that pig. They needed every penny they could get to save their farm. She forced herself to keep moving forward, following the sounds deeper into the rocky maze. What she found made her stumble backward in shock. There, hidden in a natural cave formed by fallen boulders, lay a man. He was badly injured, his clothes torn and bloodstained. His face was pale as winter frost, and his breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. Bessie stood nearby, snuffling at something beside the stranger's motionless form. Clementine's first instinct was to run. Her father had taught her never to trust strangers, especially ones who might be running from the law. But something about the man's condition made her hesitate. He looked more dead than dangerous, and if she left him here, he probably would be dead by nightfall. The stranger's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with obvious effort. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Please," he gasped, "don't tell anyone you found me." Clementine stared at him, torn between fear and curiosity. Why was he hiding what had happened to him? And why did Bessie seem so interested in that leather pouch clutched in his trembling hand? She had no idea that the contents of that pouch would change everything her family thought they knew about their worthless piece of land. Against every warning her father had ever given her, Clementine found herself kneeling beside the wounded stranger. Something in his desperate eyes told her he wasn't a threat, at least not in his current condition. But that didn't explain why he was hiding on their land, or what had left him beaten half to death. "What happened to you?" she whispered, glancing around nervously. The rocky formation provided good cover, but she could still hear voices in the distance. Her father would be waking soon, and when he discovered both his daughter and his prize pig missing, he'd come looking. The man tried to sit up, but collapsed back against the boulder with a pained grunt. "Men were chasing me," he managed. "They wanted what I found. Had to hide it somewhere safe." Clementine's eyes drifted to the leather pouch still clutched in his blooded fingers. It was old and worn, but she could see the outline of papers inside. "What's in there? Documents," he said, his voice getting weaker. "Proof that this land, your land, it's worth more than anyone knows." Her heart skipped. Their land was worthless. Everyone knew that. Her father had bought it cheap years ago, because no one else wanted the rocky, difficult terrain. The soil was poor for farming, and they'd never found anything valuable on it. That's why the bank was so eager to foreclose. "You're confused," she said gently. "This land isn't worth anything. That's why we're losing it." The stranger's eyes sharpened with urgency. "No, you don't understand. There's a railroad company looking to buy up all the land in this valley. They need it for their new line west. These papers prove they've been secretly buying up properties through false names, paying far less than the land is actually worth." Clementine felt the world tilt around her, a railroad line through their valley. If that were true, their worthless farm could be worth a fortune. But why would railroad men be chasing this stranger? And why was he helping her family instead of selling the information to the highest bidder? "My name is Boone Carter," he said, reading the questions in her eyes. "I used to work for them, help them scout the route, but when I saw what they were doing to families like yours, taking their land for almost nothing, I couldn't be part of it anymore." A distant shout made them both freeze. Clementine recognized her father's voice calling her name. He sounded angry and worried. If he found her here with a strange man injured or not, there would be serious consequences. "I have to go," she said, standing quickly. "My father's looking for me." Boone struggled to sit up again. "Wait. The papers. If something happens to me, make sure your father sees them, but be careful who else you trust. The railroad has people everywhere, and they'll do anything to keep the secret." Clementine reached for the pouch, but Boone pulled it back slightly. "Promise me," he said. "Promise you'll be careful. These men aren't just business people. They've killed to protect this secret." The word "killed" sent ice through her veins. What did she stumbled into? And if these men were dangerous enough to hunt down Boone, what would they do to her family if they discovered what she now knew? Her father's voice was getting closer, and she could hear other men with him. The search party was spreading out through the hills. In minutes they'd find this hiding spot. But as Clementine prepared to leave, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were fresh horse tracks in the dirt near the cave entrance. Someone else had been here recently, someone who might be watching them right now. Clementine's mind raced as she stared at those horse tracks. Someone had been here, and recently the prints were still sharp in the damp earth, not weathered by wind or rain. Her hands trembled as she realized the implications. If the railroad men had found Boone's hiding spot, they might still be nearby watching, waiting. "Take the papers," Boone whispered urgently, pressing the leather pouch into her hands. "Hide them somewhere safe. Don't let your father see them until you're sure you can trust everyone around him." Clementine clutched the pouch against her chest, feeling the weight of its contents and the danger they represented. "What about you? I can't just leave you here to die." "I'll manage," he said, though his pale face suggested otherwise. "But those documents are more important than my life. They're proof of fraud, theft, and worse. If the right people see them, your family and dozens of others can get justice." Her father's voice boomed closer now, angry and demanding. "Clementine, where are you, girl? Answer me right now." She had to make a choice. Stay and help Boone, risking exposure and putting her entire family in danger, or leave him and hope he survived long enough for her to figure out what to do next. The practical part of her mind, the part shaped by years of farm life in harsh realities, told her to save herself in the documents. "I'll come back," she promised, tucking the pouch inside her dress. "Tonight after everyone's asleep, I'll bring food and water." Boone nodded weakly. "Remember, trust no one completely. The railroad has been planning this for months. They might have allies closer than you think." Clementine grabbed Bessie's rope and quickly led the pig away from the cave, her heart pounding with each step. She needed to put distance between herself and Boone before her father found her. But she also needed to act natural, as if she'd simply been chasing a wayward pig. She emerged from the rocky maze just as her father appeared with two other men from town. Amos Traeger's weathered face was tight with worry and anger, his graying hair disheveled from his frantic search. "There you are," he called out, relief and fury mixing in his voice. "What were you thinking wandering off like that? These hills are dangerous, especially for a young woman alone." "I'm sorry, Papa," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Bessie broke through the fence again. "I couldn't let her get lost. We need her too much." Amos looked at the pig, then back at his daughter. His expression softened slightly, but she could see suspicion lingering in his eyes. "Did you see anything unusual out there? Any strangers or signs of trouble?" The question hit her like a physical blow. How could he know to ask? That was her father simply being cautious? Or was there something more behind his words? Clementine felt the weight of the documents against her ribs and forced herself to look confused. "No, Papa, just rocks and thorns." "Why is something wrong?" Before her father could answer, one of the men with him stepped forward. She recognized him as Mr. Harrison from the general store, but something about his expression made her skin crawl. "We heard there might be a dangerous man hiding in these hills," Harrison said, his eyes studying her face intently. "Someone who's been stealing from decent folk. If you saw anything at all, anything suspicious, you need to tell us right now." Clementine's blood turned to ice. How did they know about Boone? And why did Harrison seem so interested in her answer? She thought about what Boone had said about the railroad having allies everywhere. What if her father's search party wasn't really looking for her at all? The way Harrison stared at her made Clementine feel like prey being stalked by a predator. She forced herself to maintain eye contact while her mind scrambled for the right response. Everything depended on convincing these men that she'd seen nothing unusual. "I don't understand," she said, putting a tremor in her voice that wasn't entirely fake. "What kind of dangerous man should I be scared?" Her father moved protectively closer to her. "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Just someone who might be trespassing on our land. If he's out there, we'll find him." But Harrison wasn't satisfied. "The thing is, Miss Ross, we have reason to believe this man might be injured. If you found him, you might think you were helping someone in need, but he's not what he appears to be." The documents felt like they were burning against Clementine's skin. How much did Harrison know? Was he working for the railroad, or was this just terrible timing? She thought about Boone's warning that the railroad had people everywhere, allies who seemed like ordinary townspeople. "I only saw Bessie," she insisted. "She led me through some rocks, but I didn't see any people. Just wanted to get her home before she got into real trouble." The third man, someone she didn't recognize, spoke up for the first time. "Maybe we should search those rocks ourselves. If there's someone hiding up there, we need to find him before he causes more problems." Clementine's heart nearly stopped. If they searched the area thoroughly, they'd find Boone for sure. In his weakened state, he couldn't possibly escape or defend himself. But if she protested too strongly, it would only make them more suspicious. "Of course," her father said, "we should check every possible hiding spot. Can't have dangerous men lurking near our home." "Papa," Clementine said carefully, "maybe I should get Bessie back to the pen first. She's already caused enough trouble today." Amos nodded. "Good thinking. Take her straight home and stay there. Lock the doors and don't come out until we get back." As they prepared to search the hills, Harrison caught her arm gently but firmly. "Miss Ross, I want you to think very carefully. Sometimes when we're scared or confused, we forget details. If you remember anything at all about what you saw out there, anything that seemed out of place, you come find me immediately. It's very important." The way he emphasized very important sent chills down her spine. This wasn't the casual concern of a helpful neighbor. This was a threat disguised as friendly advice. "I will," she promised, pulling away from his grip. "I'll remember." As she led Bessie back toward the farmhouse, Clementine could hear the men organizing their search behind her. They were being systematic, dividing the rocky area into sections. It was only a matter of time before they found Boone's hiding place. Her mind raced through possible solutions. She could try to warn him, but there was no way to get back to the cave without being seen. She could tell her father everything, but what if Harrison was right there listening? What if her father was somehow involved with the railroad deal? The documents pressed against her ribs with every step, a constant reminder of the secret that could save or destroy her family. She thought about what Boone had said about proof of fraud and theft. If the railroad was really cheating families out of valuable land, then her father deserved to know the truth. But first, she had to make sure Boone survived long enough to tell it. As she reached the farmhouse, Clementine made a desperate decision. She would have to take a terrible risk, one that could expose everything. But it might be the only way to save the man who was trying to save her family. She just hoped she wasn't already too late. Clementine secured Bessie in the pen and rushed into the farmhouse. Her mind working frantically, she had maybe 30 minutes before the search party found Boone's hiding spot. 30 minutes to create a distraction that would draw them away from the caves without arousing suspicion. She ran to the kitchen and grabbed the large iron bell her father used to call workers in from the fields. Her plan was dangerous and might not work, but it was the only chance she could think of. If she could make the men believe the threat was somewhere else entirely, they might abandon their systematic search of the rocks. Clementine climbed onto the roof of the chicken coop, bell in hand, and started ringing it frantically while screaming at the top of her lungs. "Fire, fire in the barn, Papa help." The sound echoed across the valley, and she could see the search party turn immediately toward the farmhouse. They came running, abandoning their careful exploration of the rocky terrain. Her father reached her first, his face pale with panic. "Where's the fire?" he demanded, looking around wildly. Clementine pointed toward the old storage shed behind the main barn. I saw smoke coming from behind there. It looked bad. The men rushed toward the shed, while Clementine climbed down from the coop, her heart pounding. She watched them investigate the area, kicking through old hay and examining every corner. Of course there was no fire. She'd have to think of an explanation for that. I don't see anything, Harrison called out, suspicion clear in his voice. He was studying the area with the experienced eye of someone who knew what real fire damage looked like. Maybe it was just dust in the sunlight, Clementine said, trying to sound embarrassed. From this angle with the morning light, I was so scared about what you said about dangerous men that I guess I panicked. Her father put a protective arm around her shoulders. It's all right, sweetheart. Better to be safe than sorry. But next time, make sure before you raise an alarm like that. Harrison wasn't buying it. Funny how the girl sees imaginary fires right when we're about to search the one area where someone might actually be hiding. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Clementine felt her father's arm tense around her, and she realized she might have made things worse instead of better. If Harrison suspected she was lying about the fire, he'd definitely suspect she was lying about not seeing anyone in the rocks. What exactly are you suggesting? Her father asked, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. Amos Traeger had never been a man to back down from a fight, especially when someone questioned his daughter's honesty. I'm suggesting maybe we should ask ourselves why a 16-year-old girl suddenly developed such keen eyesight for fires, but somehow missed seeing a wounded man hiding in broad daylight. The third man stepped between them before the confrontation could escalate. Gentlemen, we're all on the same side here. Let's just finish checking the hills and be done with it. But Harrison shook his head. No, I think we need to have a more detailed conversation with Miss Ross, maybe back in town where we can talk properly. Clementine's blood turned to ice. If they took her to town for questioning, they might search her and find the documents. Even worse, they'd have plenty of time to find and capture Boone while she was gone. You're not taking my daughter anywhere, her father said flatly. If you have questions, ask them right here, right now, Harrison smiled, but it was the cold expression of a predator who'd cornered his prey. Actually, Mr. Traeger, I think you'll find we have every right to question potential witnesses, especially when those witnesses might be interfering with official business. Official business? Amos's eyes narrowed. Since when is the general store owner involved in official business? That's when Clementine realized her father had caught the same thing she had. Harrison was acting like he had authority he shouldn't possess. Unless he was working for someone with real power, the kind of power a railroad company might have. Harrison's confident mask slipped for just a moment, and Clementine saw something ugly underneath. Her father had struck a nerve by questioning his authority. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the two men faced each other, and she realized this confrontation was about much more than finding a trespasser. The railroad company has asked certain community leaders to assist with security matters, Harrison said finally. There are valuable surveys and documents that have gone missing, and we believe the thief is hiding somewhere in this area. Clementine felt the leather pouch against her ribs seem to grow heavier. These were the documents Boone had stolen, the proof of the railroad's fraudulent land deals. Harrison wasn't just helping with a search. He was actively working for the people trying to cheat her family. What railroad company? Her father demanded. Nobody said anything to me about railroad business in our valley. That's because the plans are still confidential. The third man spoke up. But since you're asking direct questions, Mr. Traeger, maybe it's time you knew. There's going to be a new line running through this area. The company is prepared to make fair offers for the land they need. Clementine watched her father's face as the implications sank in. Their worthless farm might actually be worth something if a railroad wanted to build through it, but she could also see the suspicion in his eyes. If the deals were legitimate, why all the secrecy? Why the armed search parties and threats? How fair are we talking about? Amos asked carefully. Harrison relaxed slightly, apparently thinking he'd gained an ally. Very fair. Much more than this land is worth for farming. That's certain. The company understands that families like yours need a fresh start somewhere with better soil. It was exactly what Boone had warned her about. They were offering just enough money to make people think they were getting a good deal, but nowhere near the true value of the land, and they were making it sound like they were doing the families a favor. What if people don't want to sell? Clementine asked before she could stop herself. All three men turned to look at her, and she immediately regretted speaking. But her father nodded approvingly, proud of her sharp question. That's a good point, Amos said. What if we like our land and want to keep it? Harrison's smile became strained. Well, progress waits for no one, Mr. Traeger. There are legal ways to acquire land for public projects, even if individual owners are reluctant to cooperate. Eminent domain, they call it. Much better for everyone if sales are voluntary. The threat was barely disguised. Sell willingly or have your land taken by force. Clementine thought about the other families in the valley, struggling farmers like themselves who probably had no idea what was really happening. They were all being manipulated into giving up land that could make them wealthy. I'd like to see these surveys and documents you mentioned, her father said. Before I consider any offers, I want to understand exactly what the railroad is planning. Unfortunately, those are the very documents that were stolen, Harrison replied. Until we recover them and catch the thief, all negotiations are suspended, which is why it's so important that we search every inch of these hills. Clementine realized with growing horror that they were trapped in an impossible situation. Her father wanted to see the documents that could prove the railroad's fraud, but those same documents were hidden in her dress. If she revealed them, she'd expose Boone and probably sign his death warrant. But if she didn't, her father might agree to sell their land for a fraction of its real value. Papa, she said quietly, maybe we should think about this carefully. Once we sell, there's no going back. Harrison's eyes sharpened as he studied her face. Wise words from a young lady, but sometimes holding on to something too tightly means losing everything. Your family has debts, doesn't it, Mr. Traeger? The bank is pressuring you. Amos's jaw tightened. Our financial situation is none of your business. It becomes my business when the railroad is offering you a way out of your troubles, Harrison replied. But only if we can resolve this matter of the missing documents first. He turned back to Clementine with that predatory smile. Which brings us back to what you might have seen in those rocks. Last chance to tell the truth, Miss Ross. As all eyes focused on her again, Clementine realized that everything depended on what she said next. The wrong words could destroy Boone, her family, and all the other families in the valley, but the right words might just save them all. Clementine took a deep breath and made the most important decision of her life. She looked directly into Harrison's eyes and spoke with quiet conviction. You're right, Mr. Harrison. I did see something in those rocks. I saw fresh horse tracks that didn't belong to anyone from our farm. The admission hit the group like a thunderbolt. Her father stared at her in shock while Harrison and the third man exchanged quick glances. Horse tracks, her father asked. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I was scared, Clementine replied, which was completely true. But listening to you all talk about stolen documents and dangerous men, I realized those tracks might be important. Harrison leaned forward eagerly. What kind of tracks? How many horses? At least 3, maybe 4. They were circling around the cave area like the riders were searching for something or someone. She paused dramatically. The tracks led away toward the north ridge like whoever it was decided to keep looking elsewhere. It was a complete fabrication, but Clementine delivered it with the confidence of someone telling the absolute truth. She was betting that Harrison and his men hadn't been thorough enough in their initial search to notice there were no such tracks. North Ridge, the third man muttered. That leads toward Miller's property. Maybe they moved their search there. Harrison was studying Clementine's face intently, looking for signs of deception. You're certain about this? The tracks led north, yes, sir. Fresh tracks heading away from our land. If you're looking for whoever took those documents, I'd say they're not hiding in our rocks anymore. Her father put his hand on her shoulder. You should have told me immediately, sweetheart. If there were armed men searching our property, I know Papa. I was just scared and confused. But if it helps find the truth about this railroad business, then I'm glad I remembered. Harrison seemed to be weighing his options. He could insist on searching the rocks anyway. But Clementine's story about the tracks gave him a new lead to follow. And if he was wrong about her lying, he'd waste valuable time while the real thief escaped. We should check the North Ridge, the third man urged. If they've got a head start, we're losing ground every minute we stand here talking. What about the documents, her father asked. I'd still like to understand what the railroad is planning before I make any decisions about selling. Once we recover the stolen papers, everything will be explained properly, Harrison assured him. In the meantime, I'd suggest you keep your family close to home. If there are dangerous men in the area, you can't be too careful. As the search party prepared to leave, Harrison caught Clementine's arm one more time. Miss Ross, if you remember anything else, anything at all, you know where to find me. I will, she promised. I just want this whole thing to be over. After the men disappeared toward the North Ridge, Clementine and her father stood in uncomfortable silence. She could feel his eyes on her, studying her face the way Harrison had. Clementine, he said quietly, I've known you your whole life. You're my daughter and I love you more than anything in this world. But I also know when you're not telling me everything. Her heart sank. Had she been that obvious, had all her careful deception been for nothing? Papa, whatever you're hiding, he continued, whatever you think you're protecting me from, I need you to trust me enough to tell the truth. Our family's future might depend on it. Clementine realized she was at another crossroads. She could continue lying to her father, or she could take the biggest risk of all and trust him with everything. The documents seemed to burn against her skin as she made her choice. Clementine reached inside her dress and pulled out the leather pouch, her hands trembling as she placed it in her father's weathered palms. Papa, there's something you need to see, but first there's a man hiding in those rocks who's hurt badly. He gave me these documents before Harrison and the others started searching. Amos stared at the pouch, then at his daughter's frightened face. What man? What documents? His name is Boone Carter. He used to work for the railroad, but he stole these papers because they prove the company is cheating families like us. Our land isn't worthless, Papa. It's worth a fortune, and they're trying to buy it for almost nothing. Her father opened the pouch with careful hands and began reading the documents inside. Clementine watched his expression change from confusion to anger to determination as he absorbed the contents. Survey maps, purchase agreements, correspondence between railroad officials, all proving that their valley was worth 10 times what Harrison had offered. These families here, Amos said, pointing to names on a list. The Millers, the Johnsons, the Crawfords, they've already sold for a fraction of what this says their land was worth. Boone tried to warn them, but it was too late. That's why Harrison and his men are hunting him. They can't let word get out about what the railroad is really doing. Amos closed the pouch and looked toward the rocky hills. Where is this Boone Carter now, hidden in a cave in the rocks? He's badly hurt, maybe dying. I promised I'd come back tonight with food and water, but I don't know if he'll last that long. Her father was quiet for a long moment, thinking through all the implications. Finally, he stood up with the determined look Clementine knew meant he'd made an important decision. We're going to get him, Amos said. Right now, while Harrison and his men are chasing shadows on the North Ridge, and then we're going to make sure every family in this valley knows the truth about what's happening to their land. They gathered medical supplies and food from the house, then made their way quickly through the rocks to Boone's hiding place. They found him unconscious but still breathing, his condition worse than when Clementine had left him. Working together, they managed to get Boone back to the farmhouse and into Clementine's room, where her father cleaned and bandaged his wounds. As they worked, Boone drifted in and out of consciousness, but he was coherent enough to confirm everything the documents revealed. The railroad planned this for months, he whispered weakly. They identified every property they needed, then used false names and shell companies to make lowball offers. Anyone who refused to sell would face legal action, or worse, not anymore, Amos said grimly. With these documents, we can expose the whole scheme. Every family that sold can demand fair compensation, and those who haven't sold yet will know what their land is really worth. Over the next few days, while Boone recovered his strength, Amos quietly visited every farm in the valley. He shared copies of the most important documents, and soon a group of angry farmers was organizing to confront the railroad company and demand justice. Harrison and his men never returned to search the rocks. Apparently, following Clementine's false trail had led them far enough away to lose interest in their property. By the time they realized they'd been deceived, it was too late to stop the truth from spreading. 3 weeks later, Clementine stood on her family's front porch, watching surveyors mark the boundaries for the new railroad line. But these weren't railroad employees working in secret. These were independent surveyors hired by the Farmers Coalition to ensure fair compensation for every acre the railroad needed. Boone Carter had recovered enough to testify before a federal judge about the railroad's fraudulent practices. The company was forced to pay fair market value for all the land they'd acquired through deception, and several officials were arrested for fraud. As for the Ross family, Their worthless farm turned out to be worth enough to pay off all their debts and still have money left over for a new start wherever they chose to go. Clementine smiled as she watched Bessie rooting around in her pen. Following that stubborn pig had led to the adventure of a lifetime and saved her family from ruin. Sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where courage and justice collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.